Welcome to the Screen the Screener College Basketball Podcast with your hosts, Mike Randall and Gus Kearns.
All right, welcome in, listeners, to the Screen the Screener College Basketball Podcast, where we're always talking everything college hoops. You could have been anywhere else in the dial, but you chose to be here with us, Mike and Gus, and we appreciate that. And with the start of the basketball season coming in, we are just going to try to bring in as many great guests as we can. So we figured we'd give a little call in to the 3 Bid League podcast and talk to the two hosts, Tyler and Matt. Tyler and Matt, thank you so much for joining the podcast. And let's talk some Big Ten basketball. What do you say? Some A10 basketball. What do we say?
It's fine. Neither of those conferences have the right number of teams. So easy mistake to make.
And if you throw in the Big 12, I mean, come on, it's getting ridiculous. Please give them a follow over at 3 Bid League Pod on the Twitter machine. And Tyler is putting out a little content over at Busting Brackets, so please give his work a follow over there as well. Love the Busting Brackets crew. So let's just start with the starting line. We have the Bonnies coming off a gigantic win, kings of the second half comeback. George Mason knocking off a Maryland team. Richmond has multiple super seniors. Introduce the listeners to what's occurring early in the non-conference schedule for the A10 and maybe some highlights.
So I guess I'll kick it off here. I think we're probably a little late to the party telling everyone that they need to go watch St. Bonaventure.
Right.
We're about 24 hours removed from them putting the beat down on Marquette. But for anyone who hasn't seen them yet, they have 5 senior players who led the league in percentage of minutes played last year by starters, made the NCAA tournament as an 8 seed. This crew has this incredible combo of chemistry and IQ that rivals really any 5 in the country. And they certainly have their flaws. There's a reason why they're not number 1 in the country, but they're one of the smartest teams I've ever seen play. They have 3 guards who are offensive dynamos. Asuna Shunahi is one of the best shot blockers in the league, and they're just a delight to anyone who enjoys basketball beyond just fancy dunks.
That's really well said, Tyler. I think that the continuity and, the continuity of minutes played together, that is something that will not fall into, the normal box score, but it's completely valid, especially in a season like this season after C19.
Yeah, I'd really say at this point, St. Bonaventure, I think everybody expected them to be great. Preseason favorites pretty much unanimously across the A10. And I know some fans within the conference might not want to hear this, but after the Bonnies' dominating performance at the Charleston Classic and with some other teams not getting off to as great of a start, it really is starting to feel like a fight for second place in the A10. Although I do think there are a couple teams, like you mentioned, George Mason and Richmond especially, a lot of teams that are going to be contending for those other double bye spots once we get to the A10 tournament. So even though the Bonnies have been getting a lot of attention, and I think it's fair to say they are the clear favorite, there are a couple other teams that we do need to pay attention to after the first couple weeks.
Agreed. And I guess the next thing is just the quick scout. You mentioned like the casual basketball fan is going to take a look at the rankings, this week over the holiday season and take a peek at, the Bonnies being, within the top 20 and then, reading the box score or the crawl on the bottom with George Mason, like you mentioned, taking down a ranked Maryland team. With fresh coach Kim English, who we all adore. What other little tidbits do you think we might need to start paying attention to now that the A10 is out of the gate and kind of rolling in the right direction at the top?
I think one thing to keep an eye on for Richmond especially, so they went in as the preseason number 2 team. A lot of people had high hopes for the Spiders after a pretty disappointing 2021 season that was heavily interrupted by COVID-19. I think a lot of people are down on Richmond right now because they have blown a couple of close opportunities against Utah State and Drake, which those both would have been potential Q1 or Q2 games that could have helped them build a resume. But what you need to keep an eye on with Richmond is that Chris Mooney really loaded up the non-conference schedule. They've got a game coming up against Maryland over Thanksgiving, and in the second game of their tournament, they could play Louisville or Mississippi State. They've also got NC State, Wofford, and Northern Iowa coming up too later in December. So the Spiders still have a lot of chances to build a resume. And then I'd say the same thing about another team that has maybe some at-large potential, St. Louis, who after a pretty easy start to the season, they've still got games against some really good mid-majors such as Boise State, UAB, Belmont, Drake, and then they also get Auburn later on. So a lot of chances for those two teams, which I think we're expecting to see towards the top of the conference. So I'd say that's one of the big things I'm looking forward to in this non-conference.
Yeah, and Matt hit on the what's important for the tournament angle. So I'll give a few entertainment bullet points here. Like he mentioned, Richmond, a team filled with super seniors who can score with the best of them and also might not be able to guard a middle school team right now. Right. If you love scoring, the Spiders are for you. On the other side of the city of Richmond, Hassan Ward is basically turned into a young Nerlens Noel on defense. He rejected Scottie Pippen Jr. at the rim, I believe, twice when they played Vanderbilt. He is a shot blocking machine and is just so fun to watch. And then if you really just love chaos and a little bit of fan depression, Dayton right now is trotting out a bunch of 4-stars and highly hyped transfers. And even if you just look at their last game against Austin Peay, they have the 5-star freshman Deron Holmes with, I believe, 3 blocked shots in that game. Scoochie Smith's little brother, Malachi Smith, has now become their point guard. They scored in the mid-80s despite only 3 made threes and lost to a team that's sub 300 in KenPom. So they can delight you, they can do amazing things, and then they can just completely blow terrible games. But it's always interesting as long as you're not actually rooting for them.
That is an amazing quick scout. And anytime we can get a Scoochie Smith mention on the podcast, we're fans of that. So well done. Well played, Tyler. Okay, let's pay attention to the talent. Scoochie Smith is one of our favorite older school Dayton players. And, we've seen NBA lottery picks like Obi, from Dayton. We've seen first round selections that have been really successful, most recently like Bones from VCU and, all-time legends, NBA legends like Steph. Educate the listeners who they might need to pay attention to this season. Who might be that next impactful player or players that are housed inside the A10 right now?
So if you're asking about NBA specifically, we get this question in our mailbags like every time we do it. And I think the fans of a lot of teams right now think that they have a first-round pick. And as someone who watches the NBA a lot, I can tell them that they don't. The one guy that I would keep an eye on is Bonaventure's point guard, Kyle Lofton. And especially the way that the NBA has shifted this year, where defense is becoming a little bit more important. You can be a more physical player and get away with it. Lofton could very easily turn into a TJ McConnell, Alex Caruso type, just a guy who can score enough to get by, basically. Great passer, very good defender, the kind of guy that you would just love to have as your eighth man.
Yeah, I think I'd go with another guy, too, with some NBA potential, and maybe the most common player I've seen on some draft boards this year is Hyong Jun Junior from Davidson, who has gained a reputation as being one of the best sharpshooters in the entire country. Last year, he went 50% from the floor, 40% from 3, and 90% from the line, so just an excellent all-around scorer. And after not really lighting it up the first 4 games of the season, he went off for 25 points over the weekend against East Carolina, and he's finally starting to be more aggressive for Davidson, which is something that they need since they lost Kellen Grady over the offseason. So I think Lee, just with his insane shooting ability, that's what NBA teams want to see these days. And if he can just become a more well-rounded player, obviously he needs a little bit of work on his defensive game, but offensively, I'd say he's about as good as it gets in the A-10.
Just to bring it full circle there, when we talked to Gary Parrish of CBS earlier this preseason, he also mentioned Lofton as not only, a potential NBA player, but as a, dark horse All-America type player. The Bonnies are going to continue to operate at such an efficient level. And, Lee, you mentioned those shooting numbers. That's kind of like the holy grail. I mean, we all got excited when Chris Middleton from the Bucks tickled that at the end of the season a few seasons back. And, if you have those numbers, obviously we pay attention to you immediately. And, Lee is no different from Davidson, especially inside of McKillop offense. All right, so we mentioned Deron Holmes earlier at Dayton as one of maybe the impact freshmen or one of the freshmen that could stand out. Is there another freshman or two, gentlemen, that we should provide some attention to inside your conference that maybe might start finding their way after getting their feet wet during the non-conference schedule?
Yeah, I would say the unfortunate thing about the A-10 this season, it really feels like out of the contending teams in the conference, not very many of them have a true impact freshman. So you have to go a little bit further down the standings. One guy I definitely think we need to keep an eye on is Eric Reynolds from St. Joseph's, who just won A-10 Rookie of the Week after a couple of 13-point games. It hasn't really translated to a great performance from the Hawks this year, but him and Jordan Hall look like potentially one of the best backcourt duos in the entire conference. And then another guy that Tyler and I have been very high on going into this season is Jaden Nunn from VCU, which he's had some great defensive games. He's one of the team's leaders in steals, and he's helped contribute to a really good Rams defense. But unfortunately, just as Tyler mentioned earlier, VCU has really struggled offensively. So we're both hoping he can turn it around a bit, especially with Ace Baldwin being out for the Rams. They're going to need a point guard to step up, and I still think he's got a lot of potential. If you go back to his recruiting days, he was getting looks from a lot of high major schools, and clearly he's a very talented player.
Yeah, I want to pile on to the Jaden Nunn thing. He was my preseason Rookie of the Year pick. And when you listened to Mike Rhodes throughout the offseason just talk about him and what he can do, there was all these mentions of, I don't think he officially said he was first guy in, last guy out of the gym, but he was kind of saying things in that vein and just constantly going over how hard of a worker he was, how tough he was in practice with all of these upperclassmen. And when a guy like Mike Rhodes, who is normally not a big talker, starts giving that kind of praise to a player who's never played a game in his life, it's definitely warranted. He hasn't shown a ton on offense yet. His best game so far, he had 10 points on 5 of 10 shooting against Chattanooga in a loss. But we saw with Bones Highland and Ace Baldwin the last 2 years that VCU freshman guards do not come on quickly. This is going to take time. But we saw both of them improve throughout the season. I think come January, February, Nunn's going to be a really special player. And since Matt already hit on him, I'll slip one in here of a guy that maybe won't make an impact this year. This might be more of kind of a longer-term bet, but I've caught a lot of Duquesne this year. Primo Spears is a really interesting player. He's a dynamic scorer, and I've watched a lot of Duquesne over the last 15 years. The last freshman I can remember with this kind of all-around-the-court scoring talent is Melquan Bolding. And you're probably wondering, how does Duquesne get a guy like that? I think the best way to describe his weakness is he's unhinged on offense. He doesn't always see the right pass. He kind of just goes to the hoop with reckless abandon. And he's a guy, you see the talent, and he just needs to spend a few months of practice with some really good coaches. Maybe he figures it out this year. Maybe it's not till next year. But he's got a dynamic all-around-the-court offensive point guard ability.
I think that's the first time we've heard the term unhinged in a positive fashion on the podcast. That's fantastic.
It's half positive. Sometimes I don't think he knows where he's going when he heads to the hoop.
I think maybe we can maybe use optimistically used of unhinged right there. All right, so gentlemen, with C19 thieving everybody of opportunity the last couple of years, especially 2 seasons ago with Dayton, they were robbed of the opportunity to justify the outstanding season with a possible Final Four trip or a number 1 seed. What do you think might happen, or what do you think might occur? Look into the crystal ball, maybe pull out a palm and try to palm read. And what do you think might happen with the conference in March? Is there another team, besides St. Bonaventure, that has the opportunity to maybe garner a game or surprise somebody or make a run?
The easy answer is obviously Bonaventure. I picked them to be a top 4 seed in the tournament. I still feel good about that now. So I'll give that at the top. I guess if we're picking a dark horse, I'd probably say VCU. I think Richmond's probably the more obvious answer, but I don't know if their defensive problems are fixable because they haven't been the last 2 years with this unit. Plain and simple, VCU's offense sucks right now. They're going to need Nunn to get better. They need the Washington transfer Marcus Sishonis, or I still don't know how to say his name. They need him to become better integrated, and they need Baldwin to come back healthy. If they can do that, they can probably scrap together a respectable offense because everything we've seen in the first 4 games indicates they might have one of the 10 best defenses in the entire sport.
Yeah, I think I'd pretty much agree with Tyler. St. Bonaventure is the clear choice right now. And I think what gives me a lot more confidence that they can win a game or two in March is that this past week they won a few very quality games outside of the A10, which they didn't have the chance to do last year. But we are the 3-Bid League podcast, so we do have to hope that a few other teams out of the conference will make it to the big dance. I'm still holding a little bit of belief in Richmond. Their defense has just been a mess this year, and I think the big hope we had is that 2 seasons ago when they finished behind Dayton for second place in the A10, they had one of the best defensive teams in the entire league, and they just haven't gotten back to that point, but they are an excellent outside shooting team that does not turn the ball over, and with all that experience, if they can make it to March Madness, that seems like the kind of team you want, just an experienced mid-major. I'd kind of say the same thing about Davidson, where if they can maybe go on a run in the A10 tournament, they are the type of team that could just light it up from 3-point range and also very disciplined. Their turnover numbers are very good. And then I think I'd just finish it up with St. Louis, even though there was a lot of pessimism going in, losing Javonte Perkins, who had a good chance to be the leading scorer in the A10, to be honest. But they've averaged 83 points per game against Division I teams this year, and they also dropped about 130 against the D2 school last week, so I'm not going to count that one. But Yuri Collins has been an awesome point guard this year. They've got a couple of really good outside shooters like Gibson Jimerson, and so far their offense hasn't really missed a beat. So we'll see if that keeps up as they get into some of their more difficult games. But I do like what I've seen from St. Louis so far this year.
I think people got off the bus a little bit with, like you mentioned, the Perkins injury with that team. And we know, from years past that they can defend and they will value possessions, and they can definitely grind out a game. So I think the more interesting part about, St. Louis on a whole is that points per game that you mentioned that they're averaging thus far, that seems a little bit out of character and maybe a positive move out of character for St. Louis. So I was kind of paying attention to them as well and was still maybe scratching my own head saying like, can they do this without, like you mentioned, potentially one of the leading scorers inside your conference? And you hate to see a team like VCU get robbed, of an opportunity inside the tournament once they were already, established their ticket and they punched their ticket. So I think no conference more than your own has really experienced and been robbed of opportunity from what's been, terrorizing the world for the past couple of years. All right, let's talk about changes. There's a squad. Is there you guys watch your league and you Tyler, like you mentioned you watch a ton of NBA. Is there something that a team or a squad or a player that holds that's interesting, like metric wise, whether it be more threes, impactful defense, turnover ratio, tempo, 2-point percentage, that might aid them, like whether it be on the court, maybe in a wager, or maybe like if something was invested in it. I mean, we all know that, betting St. Bonnie's in the second half line is obviously money to go right now. Is there something else that's really caught your eye, whether it be for one reason or another inside your conference?
If we're talking specifically from a wager perspective, I'll pull everyone's eyes a little bit further down the standings to UMass, who has been playing just a boatload of crazy shootouts so far. They are currently 296th in opponent effective field goal percentage. That's the bad end. And 308th in opponent 3-point percentage. And we were incredibly concerned about their perimeter defense going into the season to begin with. So not a lot of reason to believe that that's going to get any better. They have a lot of very interesting guards. Guys like TJ Weeks and Rich Kelly are kind of come and go as to whether or not they're going to be good that game on offense. But they got a stellar point guard, Noah Fernandes. He's a triple nickel machine in the points, rebounds, assists categories. So UMass, I think Vegas is going to have to start giving them some very, very high lines for the over-under, because they're going to be just kind of flying over the over if they don't.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, UMass they've been a fun team this year. I'll give you one, though, that's maybe been a little bit better on the defensive end, and it's actually a team that's played very well that I don't think we've talked about yet, but Rhode Island has so far this year been the number one shot blocking team in the nation, or at least their shot blocking rate has been best in the country. They're pretty much always going to have two of Mekhi Mitchell, who transferred from Maryland last year, and then Antoine Walker. They're always going to have a couple of those guys on the court at the same time, and that just turns them into this interior defense powerhouse. They're also holding opposing teams under 39% on 2-point shots, so I think what I would look for teams playing Rhode Island is if you're not able to effectively shoot the ball from the outside, you're just going to have a really difficult time scoring points. And so I'd say Rhode Island, too, just as a sleeper in general. They did slip up a little bit against Tulsa, but they have a couple of wins against Boston College, and they're playing pretty well this year, especially defensively.
We were looking for some insight, and I think that's exactly what Matt and Tyler provided. They're well done, gentlemen. Please go ahead and give their podcast a follow. It is at 3Bid League. And again, Tyler is doing a little content over at Busting Brackets, so please follow him over there. Again, we love the Busting Brackets crew. Gentlemen, last question, unscripted. Since it's the holidays, what's one thing that you're thankful for these holidays? Happy Thanksgiving, by the way, gentlemen.
Yeah, happy Thanksgiving to you too, Gus. We're only a few days out. I assume by the time most people hear this, it'll probably be right on the doorstep. I'll keep it with the basketball theme. We both made it back to UD Arena together this week. I got to see the new Cooper Fieldhouse up at Duquesne. I'm thankful to be back at basketball games. Not even just the enjoyment of it, but trying to do the pod. You don't realize until you go basically a season and a half without doing it that it's so much easier to evaluate guys when you're in person. You get to see so many of the little nuances. You get to see the look on Malachi Smith's face when he blows past his defender for a beautiful drop-off pass. And you get to kind of see who's got the swagger going and who doesn't. So very thankful to get to go back to the games.
Yeah, I think I'd pretty much echo that response. I've been fortunate to go to 2 Dayton games this year. Unfortunate to see 2 losses against some really bad teams, but it's just so much fun to be back there in person. And I've also just been thankful for the fact that so far there have been very few cancellations in college basketball. The A10 was just hit really hard last year. I think we were only ahead of about 1 or 2 other conferences last year in terms of getting games played. So that's been really nice so far, and just hoping we can continue to have a fun season, keep going to some games, and just enjoy some great basketball.
Man, that sounds absolutely perfect. I reflect both of those. Thankful for actually seeing some games, seeing them in person, and then for everybody being healthy and not having those stoppages and having everybody's rosters and programs be on the up and up and have a healthy stamp. So, gentlemen, I hope that your holidays are healthy and happy, and you guys get to intake some college hoops during the weekend. So thank you very much for giving a couple minutes. Again, please follow Matt and Tyler over at 3Bid League over on Twitter. They do a fantastic job following the A10, but then also, diving into a couple of other odds and ends along the way. So you'll be highly entertained over there. Gentlemen, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Yep.
Cheers, cilantro. Grazie, everybody. Arigato.